Word had spread through the station like fire through dry grass. And by the time Ji-won returned to the medical wing with his decision made, a small crowd had gathered outside Myra's chamber. He recognized some of the faces from his calls and his conversations. But there were others he had never seen before. Aliens of species he could not name watching him with expressions he could not read. Voronthal stood near the door like a guardian carved from blue stone. And Sulnath the Kethvari engineer was speaking quietly with a group of her own kind. "What is happening?" Ji-won asked as he pushed through the gathering. Thesivn appeared at his side, and the curator's many eyes swept across the crowd with something that looked almost like wonder. "News of your efforts has traveled," Thesivn said, "and it seems you have attracted attention." A creature made of what appeared to be living shadow detached itself from a corner and glided toward Ji-won, and he forced himself not to step backward, even though every instinct screamed at him to run. "I am called Whisper," the shadow said, and its voice sounded like wind through dead leaves. "And I am of the Umbral. And we do not often interact with other species." Ji-won nodded, not trusting his voice. "I have watched you for the past 3 hours," Whisper continued, "and I have listened to your calls and your pleas and your refusals. And I have seen you refuse to give up even when others would have accepted defeat." The shadow rippled in a way that might have been movement or might have been emotion. "My kind lives for 200 years, Whisper said, "and I have 140 remaining. And I have no family and no friends and no one to share my time with." Ji-won felt something cold touch his hand, and he realized the Umbral was reaching for him. "I will give 15 years to your cause," Whisper said, "because I have years to spare and nothing to spend them on. And because you have shown me something I did not know existed." Ji-won's throat tightened, and he could not speak. "What did I show you?" He finally managed. "Hope," Whisper said simply. And then the shadow withdrew into the crowd and disappeared. The scene made a soft sound that might have been surprise. 15 years, the curator said. "Combined with your previous 31, that brings your total to 46. 1 year short." Ji-won looked around the room at the faces watching him, and he saw sympathy and curiosity and something that might have been admiration. But no one stepped forward. "I will give the final year," he said. "That would bring your personal contribution to 21 years, Thesivn said, "and reduce your remaining lifespan to approximately 17 years. Ji-won nodded. "I know." A commotion at the back of the crowd drew his attention, and he turned to see a Kalanorian pushing through the gathered aliens with determination. The Kalanorian was small and covered in iridescent feathers, and her eyes were bright with emotion. "Wait," she called out. "Do not sign yet." She reached Ji-won and stood before him, breathing hard from her rush through the station. "I am Dr. Nethvari," she said, "and I am a healer at this station. And I heard what you are doing for your friend. I am grateful for your interest," Ji-won said carefully, "but I have already found enough donors." The Kalanorian shook her head, and her feathers rustled with agitation. "You have found enough years," she corrected, "but you are getting too many of your own, and I cannot allow that." She reached into a pouch at her side and produced a small device that glowed with soft light. 30 years ago," she said, "my egg clutch was dying from a disease that no Kalanorian healer could cure. And we had given up hope." Her voice trembled with memory. "A human nurse named Park. Jisoo was working at the colony station where we lived," Nethvari continued. "And she spent 6 days, without sleep, researching our biology and developing a treatment that saved all 7 of my children." Ji-won felt tears threatening again, and he blinked them back. "When I asked her why she had done it," Nethvari said, "she told me that she could not watch children die when she might be able to help, and that it did not matter that they were not her species or her family." The Kalanorian pressed her device into Ji-won's hand. "I have carried this debt for 30 years, she said, and I have never found a way to repay it, because Geo died of old age before I could return the kindness. She straightened to her full height, which barely reached Ji-won's chest. I will give 5 years, she declared, and you will reduce your own contribution by the same amount. And I will not accept any argument. Ji-won stared at her. That would bring the total to 51 years, he said, which is more than we need. The Sylvain stepped forward, and the curator's voice carried across the silent crowd. Excess donations are returned proportionally to all donors, Desavain explained. So your generosity will reduce the burden on everyone who has given. Nethvari nodded with satisfaction. Good, she said. Then perhaps this human will keep a few more of his years. The crowd began to murmur, and Ji-won heard voices speaking in languages he did not understand. But the tone was unmistakable. They were Muvin Varnthol pushed through to stand beside Ji-won, and the old Draconith placed a massive hand on his shoulder. I told you not to thank me yet, Varnthol rumbled. And now I tell you this. I have never seen anything like what you have done today. Sulaneth appeared on Ji-won's other side, and her wide eyes were bright with wonder. My people have a saying, she said, that to witness the impossible is to be changed by it. I think I finally understand what it means. Desavain raised one long hand, and the crowd fell silent. We have gathered 51 years for the treatment of Kang Mira, the curator announced, from 14 donors across 8 species. And this is unprecedented in the 9,000 years of Varanthi healing arts. The curator's many eyes fixed on Ji-won. In all that time, Desavain said slowly, no single patient has ever inspired multiple species to donate years on their behalf. And no human has ever sacrificed so much for someone who shares no blood with them. Ji-won shook his head. They are not doing this for Myra, he said. They are doing it because they are good people who saw someone in need. They are doing it because of you, Desavain corrected. Because you showed them something they did not know they were capable of. And because your willingness to give everything made them want to give something too. The curator gestured toward the inner chamber. The ritual will begin in 1 hour, Desavain said. And all donors must be present and willing. And the process will take several hours to complete. Ji-won looked at Mira through the stasis field. And for the first time since he had arrived at the station, he allowed himself to feel hope she was going to live. The crowd began to disperse, and Ji-won found himself surrounded by the donors who had pledged their years for his. Friend Varnthol stood like a mountain of blue scales, and Sulaneth bounced on her feet with nervous energy, and Whisper lurked in a corner like a piece of living darkness. Nethvari preened her feathers with quiet dignity, and the Synthary traders spoke to each other in their clicking language. And Yusi-Ojin, the human doctor, checked her medical equipment with professional calm. They were strangers from different worlds with different lives and different beliefs. And they had come together for a woman none of them had ever met, because one human had refused to let her die. Juan felt the weight of their sacrifice pressing on his shoulders, and he made a silent promise that he would spend whatever years remained to him being worthy of what they had given. Ji-won stared at Desavain and tried to make sense of what the curator was telling him. I do not understand, he said. How can years multiply during transfer? Desavain rose and moved to a wall covered in ancient inscriptions that glowed with soft light. In the earliest days of Varanthi medicine, the curator began. Our ancestors wrote of a phenomenon they called bonded essence, and it was said to occur when donors gave their years not out of obligation or transaction, but out of genuine connection and selfless intent. The inscriptions pulsed gently as Desavain traced them with one long finger. The theory was that the universe itself recognized such sacrifice. Desavain continued and responded by amplifying the gift. But in 9,000 years of practice, we have never observed it. Ji-won felt his heart beating faster. Until now, he said. Until now, Desivane confirmed. And the implications are significant. The curator turned back to face him. The amplification effect did not simply enhance the healing, Desivane explained. It also created a feedback loop. And the years that were given are slowly being returned to the donors. Jiwan's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean returned? I mean that over the next several years, Desivane said carefully, every donor will gradually regain the years they contributed. Not all at once, but in small increments as the bonded essence disperses. Jiwan sat in stunned silence. He had walked into this chamber believing he had traded 16 years of his life for Myra's survival. And now he was being told that he might get those years back. How is that possible? He finally managed it. Desivane made a sound that might have been a sigh. I do not know, the curator admitted. And that is perhaps the most remarkable part of this situation. Because the Varanthi have studied life and death for longer than your species has existed, and we thought we understood the rules. The curator's many eyes blinked in what Jiwan was learning to recognize as uncertainty. What you and your donors did today has shown us that there are aspects of existence we do not comprehend, Desivane said, and that perhaps sacrifice is more than a transaction. A soft chime sounded from somewhere in the chamber, and Desivane looked up. Your friend is waking, the curator said, and I thought you would want to be there. Jiwan was on his feet before Desivane finished speaking, and he ran through the corridors without caring how he looked to the aliens he passed. He arrived at Myra's chamber to find the other donors already gathered, and they parted to let him through. When they saw him coming, Myra was sitting up in the bed that had replaced her stasis pod, and her eyes were open and alert and filled with confusion. Jiwan, she said, and her voice was rough from disuse, but it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into a hug that probably hurt them both. But neither of them complained. What happened? Myra asked against his shoulder. I remember the raiders and then nothing. Jiwan pulled back and looked at her face, memorizing every detail as if she might disappear at any moment. You almost died, he said, and I had to pay to save you. Myra's expression shifted to concern. Pay how much? Jiwan glanced at the gathered donors, and he saw Varnthal's golden eyes watching him with something like approval. It is a long story, he said, and I will tell you everything. But first, I want you to meet some people. He helped her to her feet, and one by one he introduced the strangers who had given pieces of their lives for her. Varanthal stepped forward and inclined his massive head. I am honored to meet the woman who inspired such devotion, the Draconith rumbled, and I hope you will prove worthy of what we have given. Myra looked at Jiwan with wide eyes. What did you do? She whispered. Sulith bounced forward. Before he could answer, he convinced 14 people from 8 different species to donate years of their lives to save you, the young Kethvari said excitedly. And then something impossible happened, and the universe decided to give those years back. Myra's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something that looked like tears. You gave years of your life for me, she said to Jiwan. I would have given all of them, he replied. Nethavari pushed through the crowd with determination. He almost did, the Kelenorian said. And if not for the rest of us, he would have died before he was 50. So you should be grateful that there are still good people in this galaxy. Myra looked around at the gathered donors, and Jiwan could see her struggling to process what she was hearing. I do not know what to say, she admitted. Whisper emerged from the shadows, and Mira flinched slightly at the sight of the living darkness. Then say nothing, the Umbral whispered, for words are insufficient for what has occurred here today. Desivane entered the chamber, and the curator moved to stand before Myra with an expression of deep curiosity. Kang Mira, Desivane said, you are a fortunate being. Not because you survived, but because you have someone willing to move the stars themselves to save you. The curator glanced at Ji-won. In 9,000 years of healing, Desivane continued, I have never witnessed what I witnessed today, and I do not expect to witness it again. Myra reached out and took Ji-won's hand. Why did you do it? She asked softly. Ji-won thought about all the reasons he could give. All the debts and memories and years of partnership that had led to this moment. Because you would have done the same for me. He said. Myra did not argue. Because they both knew it was true. A week later, their ship was repaired and they were ready to leave Varanto's medical orbital. The donors had scattered back to their own lives. But they had exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. Solant had hugged Ji-won 3 times before leaving and made him promise to visit her homeworld. Someday Varanthal had clasped his arm in the old warrior's salute and said nothing. But his golden eyes had spoken volumes. Even Whisper had emerged from the shadows one last time to wish them safe travels. Now, Ji-won stood at the departure bay with Myra beside him, watching the station grow smaller through the viewport. You gave 16 years of your life for me, Myra said quietly. Desivane says I will get them back, Ji-won replied. That is not the point, Myra said. And she turned to face him. You did not know that when you signed the contract, and you would have done it anyway. Ji-won nodded. Yes. Myra was silent for a long moment. And then she did something she had never done in all their years of partnership. She kissed his cheek. Thank you, she said. For everything. Ji-won felt warmth spreading through his chest. And he smiled. Thank me by staying alive, he said. Because I'm not doing that again. Myra laughed. And the sound filled the ship like music behind them. Varantho's medical orbital shrank to a point of light among the stars. And ahead of them, the galaxy stretched out in infinite possibility somewhere on the station. Desivane stood at a viewport and watched the human ship depart. A younger Varanthi approached and stood beside the curator. Do you truly believe the bonded essence phenomenon was real? The younger one asked. Desivane was silent for a long moment. I believe that a human was willing to die at 38, so his friend could live, the curator said slowly. And I believe that 14 strangers from 8 species chose to sacrifice for someone they had never met. The younger Varanthi waited for more. Whether the phenomenon was real or not is irrelevant. Desivane continued. Because what matters is that they believed it was worth the cost. And they paid it anyway. The curator's many eyes followed the distant ship until it disappeared into the darkness between stars. That is what makes humans dangerous, Desivane said softly. And that is what makes them beautiful. The younger Varanthi did not understand. But they filed the observation away for future consideration. Some lessons took time to learn, and some sacrifices took forever to comprehend. The ritual chamber was a vast circular room with walls that seemed to pulse with soft light. And Ji-won stood at its center feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his life. 14 donors were arranged in a ring around Myra's stasis pod, each standing on a platform that glowed with symbols. Ji-won could not read Varanthal towered over everyone else, his blue scales reflecting the chamber's light like a living mirror. And Sulaneth fidgeted nervously on the platform beside him. Whisper had merged partially with the shadows of the room, only visible as a darker patch of darkness with eyes that gleamed like distant stars. Nethvari stood with her feathers pressed flat against her body, and the Synthri traders held hands in a gesture that seemed to comfort them. Both Yuseojin caught Ji-won's eye and gave him a small nod, and he felt grateful for the presence of another human in this alien place. Then entered the chamber through a door that had not existed a moment before, and the curator was accompanied by 6 other Varanthi who moved with the same fluid grace. The ritual will begin shortly, Desivane announced, and I must explain what you will experience so that you may prepare yourselves. The curator moved to the center of the room. Near Myra's pod. The extraction of temporal essence is painless, Desivane said, but it is not without sensation. And you will feel something leaving you that you did not know you possessed. Jiwon swallowed hard. Some donors describe it as warmth draining from a room. Desivane continued, while others speak of light fading from the sky. And still others feel as if they are watching a memory dissolve. The curator's many eyes swept across the gathered donors. The sensation is brief, Desivane assured them, and you will recover fully within a day. Though some report feeling tired or emotional for several weeks afterward, Varenthal rumbled something in his own language, and Desivane inclined its head. The Draconith asks if the process is reversible, the curator translated. And the answer is no, for once years are given, they cannot be reclaimed. The chamber fell silent, and Jialun could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. Are all donors still willing? Desivane asked one by one. They spoke their agreement. Varenthal's voice was a deep rumble of acceptance. And Sulanith's was high and nervous, but firm Whisper's response came as a whisper that seemed to emerge from everywhere at once. And Nethvari's feathers rose with determination as she gave her consent. The Centauri traders spoke together in perfect unison. And Yu Seojin's voice was calm and professional when it was Jiwan's turn. He looked at Myra's still face and spoke without hesitation. I am willing. Desivane raised both hands, and the platforms beneath the donors began to glow more brightly. Then we begin. The first thing Jiwan felt was a tingling in his fingertips, like the feeling of blood returning to a limb that had fallen asleep. The tingling spread up his arms and across his chest, and then it reached his heart and something shifted. It was not pain, but it was not pleasant either. He felt as if he was watching the sunrise in reverse, the light pulling back from the world and leaving shadows in its wake. Thought of his childhood and the summers he had spent running through fields with his brother, and those memories felt slightly dimmer than they had before. He thought of his first flight in space and the way the stars had seemed to welcome him, and that joy felt a little further away. He was losing something, and he could not name it, but he knew it was precious around him. The other donors showed signs of their own experience. Vorant had closed his golden eyes and stood perfectly still, and his scales had lost some of their luster. Sulanith was crying silent tears, but she did not move from her platform. Whisper had become almost invisible. Just a faint outline in the shadows. Nethavari's feathers had gone dull, and the Centauri traders leaned against each other for support. Only Yu Seojin seemed unchanged. But Jiwan could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her jaw was clenched. The process continued for what felt like hours, and Jiwan lost track of time in the endless sensation of something slipping away. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The platforms dimmed, and Jiwan found himself swaying on his feet as the world came back into focus. Thesivan moved to Myra's pod and examined the readouts with careful attention. The transfer is complete, the curator announced, and the patient is responding to treatment. Jiwan watched as color slowly returned to Myra's face, and her vital signs began to strengthen on the monitors. She was still unconscious, but she was healing. He tried to take a step toward her and found that his legs would not cooperate, and he would have fallen if Varenthal had not caught him. Easy. Human, the Draconith rumbled. You gave more than most, and your body needs time to adjust. Sulanith appeared at his other side, and together they helped him to a bench along the wall. How do you feel? She asked, and her voice was rough from crying. Jiwan thought about the question. Tired, he said finally. Like I have been running for days without rest. He looked at his hands and they seemed the same, but something was different. How much did I give? He asked. Desivn approached with a data tablet. The excess donations were distributed proportionally, the curator explained. And your final contribution was 16 years, rather than the 21 you originally pledged. Jiwan did the math in his head. Would die at 54 instead of 52, which was better than he had expected, but still far short of a natural lifespan. The patient will require several hours to stabilize, Desivane continued. And you should all rest and recover your strength. A Varanthi attendant appeared and began guiding the donors to recovery rooms. And Jiwan allowed himself to be led away from the chamber. The room they gave him was small but comfortable, with a bed that adjusted to his body and a window that showed the stars outside the station. He lay down and stared at the ceiling. And exhaustion pulled at him like gravity. 16 years. He had given 16 years of his life for Myra, and he found that he did not regret it for even a moment. She was worth every minute he had lost, and he would have given more if she had needed it. Sleep came for him like a wave, and he did not resist when he woke. A Varanthi attendant was standing at the foot of his bed with an expression that might have been concern. "The curator wishes to speak with you," the attendant said. "And there has been an unexpected development." Jiwan sat up too quickly, and his head spun. "Is Myra all right?" he demanded. "The patient is recovering well," the attendant assured him. "But the curator says there is something you need to see." Jiwan forced himself to his feet and followed the attendant through corridors that seemed longer than he remembered. They arrived at Desivan's private chambers, and the curator was waiting for him with an expression that Jiwan had never seen before. It almost looked like amazement. "Sit down," Desivane said, and gestured to a chair that had clearly been added to the room for human use. Jiwan sat. "Something has happened," Desivane began. "Something that has not occurred in the recorded history of Varanthi medicine." The curator produced a data tablet and handed it to Jiwan. "We measure temporal essence with perfect precision," Desivane explained, "and we collected exactly 51 years from your donors." As expected, Jiwan looked at the tablet but could not understand the symbols on the screen. "However," Desivane continued, "when we examined the patient's recovery, we found something impossible." The curator leaned forward, and all of its eyes were fixed on Jiwan. "The years multiplied during transfer," Desivane said, "and your friend received far more healing energy than should have been possible from the donation amount." Jiwan shook his head in confusion. "What does that mean?" Desivane was silent for a long moment. "It means," the curator said slowly, "that something happened during the ritual that we cannot explain." The communication center was a vast room filled with screens and terminals designed for dozens of different species. And Jiwan found a human-compatible station in the corner and began making calls. He started with his family. His mother answered from their small apartment in Bizan, and her face lit up when she saw him before darkening with concern at his expression. "Jiwan, what is wrong?" she asked. He explained everything in a rush of words that tumbled over each other. And when he finished, there was silence on the other end of the connection. 47 years, his mother repeated softly. And he could see her doing the same math he had done earlier. "I am not asking you to give everything," Jiwan said quickly. "Even a few years would help, and I am going to ask everyone I know." His mother's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head slowly. "I am 62 years old, my son, and I do not have years to spare. And your father is even older than me." Jiwan felt his heart sink, but he forced himself to nod. "I understand, and I am sorry for asking." "She is a good woman," his mother said, "and I wish I could help, but I cannot give what I do not have." The call ended, and Jiwan moved to the next name on his list. His brother answered from a hospital room, where his wife was recovering from childbirth, and Jiwan could see his newborn niece sleeping in a small bed behind them. "I heard about the attack," his brother said, "and I am glad you are alive. But what you are asking is impossible." "Young, please," Jiwan said, and he hated the begging tone in his voice. "I have a daughter now," his brother replied, and his voice was firm but not unkind. And she needs her father to be there for her whole life, not just part of it. And I cannot take years away from her future for someone who is not family. Myra is family to me. Ji-won said. Then you give your years, his brother said. But do not ask me to sacrifice my child's father. The screen went dark, and Ji-won sat in silence for a moment before forcing himself to continue. He called old shipmates and former employers and people who owed him favors from years past. And the responses were all variations of the same theme. Some disconnected the moment he mentioned the cost, and others listened politely before making excuses. And a few expressed genuine sympathy, but said they could not help. 1 hour passed, and Ji-won had gathered promises totaling 3 years from 2 distant cousins who barely knew Myra but remembered her kindness at a family gathering years ago. It was not enough. And it was not even close to enough. A shadow fell across his terminal, and Ji-won looked up to see a massive creature covered in blue scales watching him with golden eyes. You are the human seeking years, the creature said in a rumbling voice. Ji-won nodded, too exhausted for surprise. I am Varanthal of the Draconith, the creature continued. And I served alongside humans during the Boundary Wars 30 years ago. And I could not help but overhear your calls. I am sorry if I disturbed you. Ji-won said. Varanthal made a sound that might have been a laugh. You did not disturb me, but you did confuse me. For I have been listening to you beg others to give their years for someone who shares no blood with you. Ji-won felt a flash of anger cut through his exhaustion. She's my partner and my friend, he said. And she has saved my life more times than I can count. And I would die for her without hesitation. Varanthal's golden eyes studied him for a long moment. That is what confuses me, the Draconith said. For among my people, we would never sacrifice ourselves for one who is not kin. And yet you speak as if this woman is worth your entire existence. She is, Ji-won said. Simply. Varanthal was silent. And then he settled his massive body onto a bench that groaned under his weight. During the Boundary Wars, he said slowly, I fought beside a human squad for 3 years. And there was a soldier named Chun who saved my life when my own battalion had given me up for dead. Ji-won listened, and something in the old warrior's voice made him hold his breath. Chun carried me for 16 kilometers through enemy territory, Varanthal continued. And when I asked him why he risked himself for an alien, he barely knew. He said that leaving someone behind was not something humans did. The Draconith scales rippled in what Ji-won was beginning to recognize as emotion. I did not understand then, Varanthal said. And I am not sure I understand now, but I have lived for 180 years. And I have perhaps 40 more remaining. And I find myself curious to see what will happen if I give some of those years to your cause. Ji-won stared at him. You would donate years for a stranger. I would donate years to understand something that has puzzled me for 3 decades. Varanthal replied, and perhaps that is selfish in its own way. But I will give 8 years to your friend if you will accept them. Ji-won felt tears burning in his eyes, and he blinked them away. I accept them, and I thank you more than words can express. Varanthal rose to his full height and inclined his head. Do not thank me yet, for you still have 36 years to find. And time is running short. The Draconith walked away, and Ji-won turned back to his terminal with renewed determination. 2 more hours passed, and more donors trickled. A human doctor named Yu Seojin, who worked on the station, offered 4 years because she said Myra's medical file showed signs of someone who had spent her life protecting. Others, a pair of synthery traders, gave 2 years each because they said they had never seen anything like this and wanted to be part of something meaningful. A young Kethvari engineer named Suanith approached Ji-won with wide eyes and offered 5 years because her people lived for 3 centuries, and she wanted to understand why a human would do this. The total climbed to 22 years, and then to 28, and then to 30 on 11 years from 12 donors. Plus Jiwan's own promise of 4 years. It was still not enough. Jiwan looked at the clock on his terminal and felt despair clawing at his chest. He had 2 hours left, and he was still 16 years short, and he had run out of people to call. He stood up from the terminal and walked back toward the medical wing, and his footsteps echoed in the empty corridors like a countdown to doom. Thesivan was waiting for him outside Myra's chamber, and the curator's many eyes watched him approach with an expression that might have been curiosity. "You have gathered 31 years, Thesivan said, "which is more than I expected, but less than you need." Jiwan nodded and stared at Mira through the shimmering field. "What happens if I give the remaining 16 years myself?" he asked. Thesivan was silent for a moment. "Combined with your earlier pledge of 4 years, that would be 20 years total," the curator said. "And based on your current age and health, that would leave you with approximately 18 years of natural life." Jiwan did the math in his head. He would die at 52 instead of 70 or 80. And he would never see old age. And he would never have the retirement he had dreamed about. But Myra would live. "Give me the contract," he said. The medical station hung in the darkness of space, like a city built from glass and light. And Yoon Jiwan pressed his face against the viewport of his small cargo ship as he approached. His heart beating so hard he could feel it in his throat. Had been hauling cargo near the outer colonies when the message came through, and the words still echoed in his mind like a scream that would not fade. Kang Mira was dying. His hands had trembled so badly when he received the transmission that he nearly crashed into an asteroid field. But he had pushed his engines beyond their limits and crossed 3 sectors in half the time it should have taken now. He was here at Varanthos Medical Orbital, the most advanced healing facility in the known galaxy. And he did not know if he was too late. The docking procedure felt like it took forever. And Jiwan found himself counting his own heartbeats as the clamps locked his ship into place. He ran through the corridors without stopping to ask for directions, following the signs that pointed toward emergency care. And the aliens he passed stared at him with confusion because humans were still rare in this part of space. The medical wing was quiet in a way that made Jiwan's skin crawl, and the walls seemed to absorb sound like they were hungry for Ida. Tall creature with silver skin and too many eyes stepped into his path, and Jiwan skidded to a stop. "You are the human called Yoon Jiwan," the creature said, and its voice sounded like wind moving through hollow tubes. "Where is she?" Jiwan demanded. And he did not care that his voice cracked. The creature studied him for a moment that stretched into eternity. "I am Curator Thesivan," it said, "and I will take you to your companion. But you must prepare yourself for what you will see." Jiwan wanted to scream that he did not need preparation, that he needed to see Mira right now. But something in the curator's ancient eyes made him swallow his words and follow in silence. They walked through doors that opened like wounds and closed like healing skin. And the technology around them was so advanced that Jiwan could not even guess at its purpose then. Thesivan stopped before a chamber filled with soft blue light. And Jiwan saw her Myra floated inside a field of shimmering energy, her eyes closed and her face pale as moonrock. And there were machines attached to her that pulsed with rhythms that did not match her heartbeat. She looked small in a way she had never looked before. And Jiwan felt something inside his chest break into pieces. "What happened to her?" he whispered. Thesivan clasped its long fingers together and spoke in that hollow voice. "Your ship was attacked by raiders near the Kethvari border, and your companion fought them while you were unconscious from the initial assault, and she saved your cargo and your life. But she suffered catastrophic neural damage in the process." Jiwan remembered nothing of the attack, only waking up in the medical bay of a rescue vessel with strangers telling him that Mira had been taken to Varanthos. "The stasis field is keeping her alive," Desivane continued. But her condition is deteriorating, and without intervention, she will die within 6 hours. 6 hours, the words hit Jiwan like a physical blow, and he pressed his hand against the transparent barrier that separated him from his friend. Then help her, he said, and his voice came out harder than he intended. You are supposed to be the best healers in the galaxy, so heal her. Desivane's many eyes blinked in a pattern that might have been surprise or might have been pity. We can heal her, the curator said. The Varanthi have techniques that can repair even damage this severe, but our services require payment. And the cost of her treatment is substantial. Jiwan almost laughed with relief. I have credits, he said quickly. I have been saving for years, and I can sell my ship if I have to. Just tell me the price, and I will pay it. The curator was silent for a long moment, and Jiwan felt the first cold touch of fear creep up his spine. The Varanthi do not accept currency, Desivane said slowly. We have no need for material wealth, and our economy is based on something far more valuable. Then what do you want? Jiwan asked Desivane moved closer to the stasis field and gazed at Mira with an expression Jiwan could not read. We harvest temporal essence, the curator explained, what your species might call life force or vitality, and we draw years from willing donors to fuel our healing arts. Jiwan felt the blood drain from his face. Years, he repeated. Your companion requires extensive reconstruction of her neural pathways, Desivane said, and the cost of her treatment is 47 standard years of donated life. The number hung in the air between them like a death sentence. And Jiwan found himself doing the math without wanting to. Humans live for roughly a century if they were lucky, and he was 34 years old, which meant he had maybe 60 or 70 years left if nothing went wrong. 37 years was almost everything. That is nearly half a human lifetime, Jiwan said, and his voice sounded distant to his own ears. Indeed, Desivane replied, which is why we require donors to be fully informed and fully willing, for we do not take years from those who do not understand the cost. Jiwan stared at Mira through the shimmering field, and memories flooded through him like water breaking through a dam. He remembered the day they met at a shipping yard on Mars, both of them young and broke and desperate for work. And he remembered how she had shared her last meal pack with him even though she was hungry too. He remembered the first time raiders attacked their ship, and Mira had stood between him and a plasma blast because he had frozen in fear. And he remembered the months she spent teaching him to fly when everyone else said he was hopeless. She had believed in him when he did not believe in himself, and she had saved his life more times than he could count. And now she was dying because she had saved him again. Is there another way? Jiwan asked. And he hated how desperate he sounded. The years may be gathered from multiple donors, Desivane said, and the burden can be shared among those willing to give. But finding such donors is the responsibility of the patient or their representative, for the Varanthi do not recruit. Jiwan nodded slowly as a plan began to form in his exhausted mind. How long do I have? 6 hours, Desivane repeated. And then even our stasis technology will fail, and your companion will be beyond our ability to save. Jiwan looked at Mira one last time, memorizing the curve of her face and the way her hair floated in the stasis field like she was underwater. I need to make some calls, he said. Desivane inclined its head in what might have been respect to communication. Center is at the end of this corridor, and I will be here when you return. Jiwan turned and walked away from the chamber, and with each step he felt the weight of 47 years pressing down on his shoulders, like the gravity of a dying star. 6 hours to find donors willing to give up pieces of their lives for a woman most of them had never met. 6 hours to perform a miracle. He did not know if it was possible, but he knew he had to try. because the alternative was watching Mira die. And that was something he could not survive.